Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. This is the second rest day of the Giro d'Italia 2023. Now, today's rest day is going to be the last time where all the riders who are broken and hurt earlier here in the past 15 stages can start to get a little bit of recovery. Before we get into what's been happening before the rest day and what's going to happen after the rest day, I want to make sure everybody out there knows that whoever ordered sweatshirts and t-shirts, they've been mailed out and they're on their way to you guys. If you guys need more for birthdays and presents, of course, there's always more set up and ready to go whenever you guys like. I'll set up the link down below. And then if you don't need sweatshirts or t-shirts, of course, there's always the Patreon page down below if you want to sponsor the channel. Now, let's get into the racing because I want to go back to yesterday's stage 15 because there was one commenter that left a fantastic comment that I thought a lot of you would be interested in. He said, what takes over a rider's mind and legs in a stage like yesterday, talking about Ben Healy that was riding so aggressive in yesterday's stage 15. Then he finished second at Bergamo when it all was said and done, and lost the stage to Brandon McNulty. Well, Rob wants to know what got into his mind and legs to just take over the race and start riding so hard. A lot of times, earlier before the Giro and during the last 2 weeks here at the Giro, before stage 15 anyways, Ben Healy was looking pretty amazing. Go back to the classics, especially at Amstel Gold. His tactics were perfect, like I told you on yesterday's Beyond the Coverage. But what happens, Rob, when you get into these stages now, once he starts getting into yesterday's break, it's a large break, 15, 17 guys early, and then getting smaller and smaller throughout the stage. But when we get onto that last big 10-kilometer climb, starting with 40 kilometers to go in yesterday's race, what Ben Healy's really thinking when he's looking at Rubio is Rubio won stage 13. And a lot of times the talk throughout the commentators and probably throughout a lot of the peloton was that Rubio won that stage tactically being really good and really strong. Well, what really happened on stage 13 is Rubio was getting attacked from Cepeda and getting attacked from Thibaut Pinot. Then those two guys were arguing with each other. That was slowing the pace. That was allowing Rubio to come back to that group and sit on that group, get some recovery. They would attack away again. He'd tempo back up. He'd hold on there. And then, of course, he had a big acceleration at the finish of the line to be able to beat those two riders, Thibaut Pinot and Cepeda, who finished second and third on that stage. Now you fast forward into stage 15. Ben Healy's on flying form. He's already won a stage here at the Giro. He went great at the Classics, and he's been perfect tactically throughout most of this 2023 season without going into tiny little mistakes. He's been really solid. You get into yesterday's stage, though, because he's been riding good and because when you get into this group, he's looking around and he's trying to find the best rider in this group, the strongest rider in this group, but he hasn't realized that he probably is the strongest and best rider in this group. Instead, because he's past experiences when he's in the breaks at Amstel Gold, he's looking around, he's going, oh, there's Tadej Pogačar. I need to watch Tadej Pogačar. I need to watch, of course, Ineos because they're riding solid. And I need to keep an eye on all the best riders here, but certainly Tadej Pogačar and Tom Pidcock are the two big guys. So that's what he's been trained to do. Now you fast forward up here to stage 15, yesterday's stage before the rest day, and Ben Healy's looking in that group and he's like, who's the best guys here? Who do I have to watch? Well, there it is. There's Rubio. Rubio won stage 13 and he beat Thibaut Pinot and Cepeda at the finish there and he waxed those guys. So he's thinking this is the guy to watch. Once they're getting into the 40 kilometers to go, going up that 10-kilometer climb, you see the attacks right away from Frigo, and he sees Frigo go, and he's like, I don't have to worry about Frigo. He sees Brandon McNulty up there, and he thinks Brandon McNulty hasn't been riding good, but Brandon McNulty's been a little bit sick since the last individual time trial on stage 9 here at the Giro. Now that sickness is starting to run its course. He's getting better. If you backed up the stages here at the Giro before stage 9 individual time trial, Brandon McNulty was exceptionally good here at the Giro, but hasn't shown it much at the finish in terms of a result for himself. So it's harder to see if you're in the peloton and Brandon McNulty's attacking all over the place up the road. And then after the individual time trial, Brandon's been sick. So that explains why he lets Brandon McNulty go up the road and he starts watching Rubio because he's been trained to always watch the best rider in the group, but he hasn't realized, Ben Healy that is, that he is now the best rider in the group. So that's why when you see those mistakes being made from Ben Healy, he just hasn't adapted to being the best rider in the group again, and he learned a hard lesson on yesterday's stage 2 in the Bergamo when he finished second to Brandon McNulty. All the mistakes there were wrong. But that'll let you know there that Ben Healy is always the guy that you need to be watching in yesterday's stage 15. Now let's move on to some other interesting topics that's been happening here at the Giro d'Italia. Because there's one other story that I read where Garrett Thomas said Primoz Roglic has probably not been aggressive because last time he raced the Giro d'Italia in 2019, he came in hard and then he faded basically towards the end. Well, that's not exactly what happened in 2019. A lot like Ben Healy thinking Rubio's the strongest rider in yesterday's group of 17 when they're coming into that climb, Garrett Thomas is misexplaining or misseeing what happened in 2019. Really, what I saw in 2019, Primoz Roglic and Vincenzo Nibali, they are super strong in that race, and then they neutralized each other out at times with Primoz Roglic and Vincenzo Nibali refused to work with each other and chase down Richard Carapaz on stage 14. They neutralized each other out. The Movistar rider went up and got himself in pink and carried that all the way into the finish of the Giro. But stage 15 added a little bit more drama to Primoz Roglic right after that stage 14 because his directors were on the side of the road taking a nature break when he needed a bike. He had to switch with teams. He had to switch with a teammate. He was riding the wrong teammate's bike, dropping down the descent, chasing the whole time, crashed himself. And then, of course, the crash, the efforts done through the chase, the fact that Jumbo-Visma showed up without a dominant team in 2019 at the Giro, that led to the reasons of why Primoz Roglic was not winning that 2019 Giro. Had nothing to do with Primoz Roglic coming in fast, winning the individual time trial, beating up on everyone throughout the second individual time trial, and then, of course, fading at the end. The fade at the end had plenty of reasons to explain. Richard Carapaz is up the road. Primoz Roglic has crashed on the side of the road riding another teammate's bike into the finish on stage 15. So that explains that. And when you see a rider like Garrett Thomas leave these kind of comments, I always like to fix these because then what happens is when you're reading it at home, you're like, well, Primoz Roglic faded in 2019. He didn't fade. He crashed and he didn't have a strong team. But when you're looking at it without that information of seeing what happened on stage 14 and stage 15, it's easy to say, well, Primoz Roglic came in hot and then got cold at the finish, and that's why we might be seeing him here in 2023 racing the first part easy and then hoping to come on and do something stronger in this final week here of the Giro. Now, let's get into a little bit more details of what's been going on in terms of the tactics here and why the general classification guys have all been in a stalemate. When we started looking at Remco Evenepoel, we saw that Soudal Quickstep came in flying at the individual time trial stage 1. Remco Evenepoel put himself in pink. Then, of course, COVID had hit the whole peloton here. That has knocked out a ton of riders. We're going to start tomorrow, stage 16, with just over 130 riders here. So there's not a whole lot of riders in there to start lighting up the race. You look at Ineos, for example, they're in the hot seat with Garrett Thomas being the first real GC favorite on the general classification. Second here, just behind Bruno Aramai from FDJ, but has to be in the first place hot seat here when we're talking about the GC guys. And I told you guys at the last rest day that with 5 guys in the top 13, Ineos were going to be aggressive. They were going to put moves in all over the place. And then, of course, there was the crash from Tao Gegenhardt, and that changed the whole tactics for Team Ineos and why we see Team Ineos riding softer on the front and giving up the pink jersey. They only have 6 riders, and one's broken with Pavel Sivakov, who crashed with Tao Gegenhardt. So that means you got 5 riders. 2 aren't climbers. That means you're left with 3 there, and 1 is Garrett Thomas. So that's not a whole lot of strength in Team Ineos. We go over there to Jumbo-Visma. We look at Jumbo-Visma starting the Giro week before, and they're changing basically 4 of their riders out. So that's 50% of their team. Those guys were not ready to come here early in the Giro and do big hits. So I'm sure the managers at Jumbo-Visma just said, hey, we're going to try to do these first 2 weeks all the way to the second rest day as easy as we possibly can so that Rowan Dennis, Sepp Kuss, Koen Bouwman, and everybody else on Jumbo-Visma could recover from this first 2 weeks of incidents, crashes, rain, cold, and lack of training miles coming in to start the Giro here proper to help Primoz Roglic. Primoz Roglic, we saw come into the first individual time trial, a bit off on form, and now he's come better and better. You've seen sometimes where the GCN commentators have talked about that Primoz Roglic hasn't attacked. Well, he did attack on stage 8 and lit the whole race up, so he's done his part. but he was always calculating where he's going to do his effort, and the idea of him putting himself into the pink race leader's jersey still early here at the Giro d'Italia, I don't think was a priority for Jumbo-Visma before tomorrow's stage 16. When we get into stage 16, I think we should see all the classification guys really going at it. If we don't see Primoz Roglic trying to light up Geraint Thomas and Team Ineos, then there is something wrong physically with Primoz Roglic, I think, because when you get into tomorrow's stage 16, that's one of 3 mountain stages left, and then, of course, the individual time trial where you can gain time on Geraint Thomas. You do not want to have this come all the way down to the individual time trial, the penultimate stage here at the Giro, and rely on 8 kilometers of hard climbing to be able to win the Giro, because a lot of things can happen in 8 kilometers and you don't have a lot of time to be able to make that time back up. If you get a flat tire, you drop your chain, the bike isn't working right, you have to switch bikes, it can change the whole dynamics and you can lose that time that maybe Primoz Roglic would be gaining on Geraint Thomas with just 8 kilometers in the Giro. So I believe the racing has to start tomorrow on stage 16. Of course, if it doesn't start there's a flat stage the next day, so the sprinter team should take over on stage 17, which means if you did take the race leader's jersey on 16, you don't have to ride 17 anyways, and then that's going to get you into 18 and 19, the last 2 big mountain stages, where all hell should break loose here on the Giro d'Italia. Now, the only problem is, though, the racing has been so aggressive and the weather's been so bad, and the number of riders throughout each team, because really there's only a few teams here that are stuck with 8 riders still, Jumbo-Visma being one of them, but most of the other teams are missing numbers all over the place due to COVID and sickness. So when we start getting into the last 2 mountain stages, remember all the riders' legs are going to be a bit fatigued. But look for riders like Ben Healy, of course, who's on flying form, to put something aggressive in on those early part of the stages for 18 and 19 here at the Giro, and see if Ben Healy can't make up for yesterday's mistake on stage 15 and get himself a second Grand Tour stage victory here at the Giro. Either way, the racing's going to be hot and furious tomorrow, starting on stage 16 between the general classification guys and, of course, between all the breakaway guys, or early breakaway riders that want to get away from the GC guys because they believe blood is in the water, and they don't believe that the teams back there from Jumbo-Visma and Geraint Thomas's Ineos team will be on the front long enough and riding hard enough to be able to pull them back. So the beginning of the stage on tomorrow's stage 16 will be full gas, and then the finish of the stage, or the penultimate climb before the last climb there, it should be start where we start seeing Ineos and Jumbo-Visma really doing battle here at the Giro d'Italia. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. The racing's going to be hot and furious this last week. So I'll see you guys on the next edition of the Butterfly Effect for tomorrow's stage 16 of the Giro d'Italia.